So we all understand proverbs at some level because all our cultures have them. These short, memorable sayings or illustrations drawn from everyday life that encapsulate life lessons or perspectives, values that our culture wants us to live by and embrace. That's really what the Proverbs are, and the next section of Proverbs is just filled with a whole lot of these. So the Afrikaans sê, as die kat weg is die muis baas. When the cat's away, the mouse is the boss. The English have a very similar saying with a slightly different meaning. When the cat's away, the mouse will play. And that sort of rolls off the tongue more easily in English, and it's got a slightly different meaning to that. But we could go through all the different languages and cultures. You're going to get these sort of sayings that embody values and perspectives. So I wanted to just start by, in a sense, trying to give you a handle on how do the Proverbs work? How are they meant to work in your life? How are you meant to use them? And to do that, I'll just begin with a story. Imaginary story, you're traveling in your car down to KwaZulu-Natal, deserted section of road, and suddenly your car breaks down. Your cell phone battery is flat, so you can't call for help, so you do the very unusual thing and you pray, Lord, please send help. And finished praying, and this car comes past, pulls over, puts on his four-ways and starts backing up towards you. And you're thinking, is this an answer to prayer, or am I about to get hijacked? The guy gets out of the car, he says to you, look, I see you stuck there, can I help you? He ends up organizing a tow truck to come, he contacts your insurance company, organizes his tow truck to come and tow your car away, gets hold of your family, says to them, organize it, they'll come and pick you up. He says to you, listen, I'll wait with you until your family arrives and make sure you're okay. You're thinking, wow, So eventually your family arrive, and you greet this guy. He's about to take off. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. Thank you very much. And if you're like me, that exhausts your Zulu vocabulary. So you then switch over to English and you say to him, can I give you $100 for all your effort, man? I really appreciate what you've done. And he laughs and he lifts up his hand and he says, nah, izandla, ziyagezana. The hands wash each other. I help you, you help me, I don't want anything. That's how life works. And you're thinking, this guy's a Christian, for sure. So you ask him, and he says, no, he's a Muslim. And you're shocked, because you're thinking, how can he be so kind? How can he do all of this? But the values he's living out are not religious values. He didn't learn them in Sunday school or in the madrasa. He learned them from his grandmother as he was growing up in the village, and she was making him pack this bag of their vegetables and take it a kilometer down the road to the neighbor whose field had been flooded in the recent rains, and he's complaining, grandmother, why must we give our vegetables away, and why must we walk all this way? And she's hamba, izandla, ziyagezana. The hands wash each other, that's why. And he kind of hears that proverb over and over in different contexts and different settings, and he sees it materialize as the next year. Those same neighbors that he had taken the vegetables to, well, their field is, their own field is burned down in a fire, and all their corn is gone. And those neighbors that they helped last year come bringing a sack of corn to them this year, because why? The hands wash each other. We help each other. You help me, I help you. And so as he's driving down that abandoned road, there's something deep inside of him. When he sees you stuck next to the road, he says, I need to help you, because I don't know you, I don't know who you are, but tomorrow I could be the one stuck there and needing help. That's how life works. We need to help each other. And so he might have thought of that proverb. He might not have even consciously have thought about it, but there's something deep inside of him that has embraced that value. We need each other. We need to help each other. And that has affected the way he looks at life, the way he responds to circumstances. He's just got to stop and help. That's how the Proverbs work. That's what they are. They're these little short sayings taken from everyday life that embody values, perspectives that our culture wants us to embrace and live by. Sometimes these values agree with biblical values. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're true. Sometimes they're 100% false. Sometimes we consciously reject or accept those values, those proverbs. Much of the time we just unconsciously imbibe them. We just take them in and begin living them out without even realizing. So this next section of Proverbs from 10 to 22 are a collection of all of these sort of sayings. You'll see there in Proverbs 10 verse 1, it's called the Proverbs of Solomon, because undoubtedly he coined a great many of them. He created them, but not only that, he also collected them from the Hebrew culture which he was a part of. And not only from the Hebrew culture, but from the surrounding cultures that were around them. There's a section from 22 to 24 that bears a close resemblance to Proverbs, Egyptian Proverbs. And we know the Israelites spent 400 years in Egypt, and so undoubtedly they absorbed some of those proverbs into as their own as well. But the difference is this is an inspired collection of proverbs. These are proverbs that represents God's values, God's perspectives, the habits and the practices and the thinking that God wants us to embrace and live by. And so as we encounter these proverbs, we're going to have to take the biblical, the principle of traveling instructions that we learn in the Dig and Discover workshops. We're going to have to travel back to the original context, understand what this saying means in that original context, and then travel from that original context into our own context and understand what they look like and how they apply to our world today. The Xhosa people have a very similar saying, their hands wash each other. But, you know, they are cattle people, right? That tribe. That's their background, that's their wealth. So they're saying, if you translate, it says literally, the cows lick each other. Now, I haven't been around a cow for long enough to know whether that's true or not. I don't think I want to. But if you've grown up around cattle and herded cattle and spent many hours looking after cattle, that really means something to you. And that relates to your daily life. So some of the proverbs that we encounter in the Bible, they're going to be like the hands washing each other. We also do that. We can relate to that. We can immediately get an idea of what that proverb's about. Other proverbs are going to be more like the cows lick each other. And we're going to scratch our head and go, what is that about? And we're going to have to travel back and understand that cultural context before we can apply that truth to our modern context. So what helps us with that is the Proverbs are filled with many different sayings, many of them the same value, the same principle stated in different terms, very closely connected pictures and sayings. And that repetition helps us to get the idea, even if we're not that sure about one of them. And they're scattered throughout the book of Proverbs. So for the most part, we're not supposed to take 3 chapters of Proverbs, read them together and say, what's the main idea and transformational intent of these 3 chapters? Right? We don't interpret the Proverbs that way. We're supposed to take one proverb, one saying, one illustration, one picture, pick it up, look at it, understand it, analyze it, and then relate it to other proverbs that are similar, that complement this proverb, that relate to it. Sort of like you would build a puzzle. Right? The book of Proverbs is helping us build a puzzle. Now, you don't build a puzzle starting with the top left-hand corner piece, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you work your way linearly across. That's not how you build a puzzle. The Proverbs are not building a picture in a sort of sequential way. It's giving us these puzzle pieces that we're supposed to pick up, look at, and then see where they fit in and how they fit alongside other pieces. The objective is, at the end of the day, we've got this comprehensive picture of what life should look like, how God has designed life to work, so that it can honor Him and reflect His values. But we pick one piece up and then another piece over here, and we study it, we analyze it, and then we put it in its place. If you've built a puzzle, you'll know that sometimes pieces are kind of, they group together, right? You kind of take all these pieces and you can see, this is a piece of the sky, or this is a piece of cloud, or this is a piece of this house. And you'll lump all of those pieces together because you can see they're connected. Well, sometimes in the book of Proverbs, that's how the Proverbs are. There's these clumpings or groupings of Proverbs that all relate to a similar theme. And so the opening 5 verses of chapter 10 are like that. They're like a grouping of Proverbs that kind of belong together, and each of the Proverbs then help us connect to the other ones. And they all revolve around a central theme, work. And so that's what we're going to look at. The theme of work, or the subject of work, God's wisdom on work. This is a very important issue. The first thing that God did after He created us in His image is He said, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth and have dominion over it. He gave us work to do. So whatever else it means to be created in God's image, a key component of it is taking dominion, is working out that image into all of creation. God created 6 days of the week to work. Work is going to be a big part of our existence, a big part of what makes our life meaningful and valuable and purposeful and a blessing to others. So it shouldn't be surprising then that work is a big theme in the Proverbs. If we're going to live well, if we're going to live to God's glory, if our lives are going to work the way God intended them to work, then we need to understand how to work. So Proverbs 10 verses 1 to 5. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but He thwarts the cravings of the wicked. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in the summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. So 5 principles we get from these 5 closely connected proverbs. Work is a blessing to others. Work must be done ethically. Verse 2. God rewards and blesses our work. Verse 3. Work requires diligence and planning. Verse 4. Work requires self-discipline. Verse 5. So let me stop here and say, use this time to evaluate this very important area of your life and say, do I have God's perspective of work? Am I really embracing God's ideal for work? And am I working in a way that is going to make my work a blessing to myself, to others, and to the glory of God? Work is a blessing to others. That's the opening proverb. It says, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. And immediately we're drawn back to the previous section where there's 10 lectures, father to son, right? And it sort of connects us with what's going to follow. This is how a son is going to live well. It's probably an introduction to the overarching principle of all of these proverbs. Work fits into life. Work is a part of our whole life. And our whole life is meant to be a blessing, not just to us, but to others. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. The goal of parenting is to prepare our children to live for God and His glory. The reward of parenting is to see that happen. The pain of parenting is when, despite our best efforts, our children turn their back on God's wisdom and they live by another rule book. And what does that bring? It brings sorrow, verse 1. It brings death, verse 2. It brings craving or dissatisfaction, verse 3. It brings poverty, verse 4. It brings shame, verse 5. Nothing good comes from living foolishly. That's the bottom line. at least not in the long run. So the way we live and the way we work is either going to be wise or foolish. And it has implications not on just on our own life, but also on the lives of those around us, on the lives of those who love us. Right up front, we must recognize that work fits into a category. It's part of our life. It's part of what our life is. And our life belongs to God, and it's meant to be a blessing to others. We were given life by God, and we were raised by our parents so that our lives can come to be fruitful and productive and meaningful and a blessing to others. God didn't ordain work merely as a means of getting rich or climbing the corporate ladder. You have to see your work within the context of your life. How does my work contribute to who I am and the meaning and purpose and significance of my life? And you have to see that in the context of what God has created you to be and to do. How does this fit in then with what God is doing, what God is planning and purposing? That gives all work dignity and value. Everything we do, when we do it for the glory of God, then has meaning and dignity and value. I had to come to grips with this when I began working as a janitor in the States. For 2 years, I worked for a large church there, straightening chairs, vacuuming carpets, cleaning toilets. It was such a large church that sometimes 4 of us would spend an entire shift just cleaning the toilets, and just to get through all the bathrooms. And I struggled with that work at first, to be honest. I'd gone from being an area engineer responsible for a multi-million rand plant to being a janitor, the lowest on the employment scale, earning minimum wage, responsible just to make sure the toilet paper was stocked. And I wrestled with that until I started to realize, hang on, this principle, this is part of my life. This is part of what God is doing. God has ordained this for me, and it has dignity and value. One, this work puts food on the table. Literally, I'm providing for my family. That gives this dignity and worth. Second, this work I'm doing, it's helping me be at seminary. And so that gives this work dignity and worth. Thirdly, this work I'm doing prepares the church for worship on a Sunday. Somebody's got to do this menial work in order to prepare the church, and in a very significant way, it's contributing to everything that happens on the Sunday morning. And then fourthly, I saw that I got to work with other men, and because the job was sort of easy mentally, we could get into all kinds of discussions about God and theology and all kinds of things, and build meaningful relationships as we worked. And that also became very significant to me. And so when I put that work in the context of this bigger picture of what God is doing, I began to embrace it as something that was fruitful and meaningful and purposeful. And we have to put our work into that big context, because sometimes God has work for us to do that in the moment is unpleasant and menial, and we don't understand where the significance lies unless we connect it to this bigger picture. Second, work must be done ethically. Work must be done ethically. It says in verse 2, treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. So you can gain treasure by doing unethical, wicked things, but those treasures don't profit. Getting rich by ungodly means doesn't make you richer, but poorer. The second part of the proverb really expands and explains the first part, right? Doing the right thing, living righteously, working ethically and honestly delivers you from death. So riches gained by unjust means are ultimately deadly. They kill you. They kill your relationship with God. They kill society. Our country is getting poorer because our leaders don't understand this proverb, right? We're all suffering because people are working unjustly, unrighteously, wickedly. And that work can't prosper. It can't prosper an individual, it can't prosper a family, it can't prosper a nation. This section of Proverbs is going to contain so many different proverbs that reinforce this principle. Here's just a few of them. Proverbs 11:1. Proverbs 11:1. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. If you tweak the scale so that someone thinks they're getting this amount of food for this amount of money, but you've messed this thing around so that you get more out of that, God sees, God knows, you might make more profit that way, but it's an abomination to the Lord. It doesn't serve his purposes. It doesn't gain his blessing. In the long run, it produces death. Proverbs 15:27. 15:27. Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live. He is greedy for unjust gain. What is unjust gain? One who offers a bribe. One who gets the job because he's offered something on the side. One who gets out of paying this because he's offered something on the side. And where does that come from? Greed. Greed for unjust gain. It's easier that way. It's quicker that way. I can make more money that way. But that produces death. Proverbs 16:8. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. It's better not to have that money if the only way of getting it is through unjust means, through wickedness. So as much as we are able, we need to work with integrity and not allow the world around us to impose its values on us, to pressurize us into its mold, to working its ways according to its values and its ethics. Your business will lose a lot of work if you don't offer that bribe. But your business will not serve God's purposes if you do. And what are you really wanting? To get rich or to serve God's purposes? Once we work the world's way, once we abandon God's ways, God's ethics, God's righteousness in the way we're working, our work no longer fulfills God's purpose. It doesn't reflect his character, his values. It doesn't accomplish his goals. It's useless as far as God's purposes are concerned. So how we work matters to God. And how we work should reflect God's character and God's values. You can't resort to lying and deceiving in order to sell something. The world can do that. A Christian can't. You can't hide your mistakes. The world can do that. A Christian can't. I got into trouble so many times at work because we'd go to a meeting, something had broken down, and all my colleagues are just flat out lying about it. It's this one's fault, it's that one's fault, this happened, this one. I'm going, no, we messed up, we forgot to close the valve. Oh my goodness. You're not popular when you get back from that morning meeting. And you just brought the whole team down because you're the only one who actually just said, this is what happened, we messed up. And we'll have to try and make sure we don't do it again. You can't build a career by bad-mouthing your colleagues. We can't use the world's methods as we work, because our work doesn't serve the world's goals and purposes. It serves God's. Which brings me to the next proverb. God rewards and blesses our work. God rewards and blesses our work. If you look at verse 3, the Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. So one of the rewards of work is that we earn money, or we gain produce, or we put food on the table. It's not the only reward, but it's one of the rewards. And it's an important aspect of our work. But that reward doesn't flow automatically. Notice here, it comes as a gift from God. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. God is the one who provides through work. He gives work to us. He sustains our work. He blesses our work. We won't know God's blessing on our work and through our work if we work in a way that dishonors God, that's against his values. If we're relying on worldly means to work and to worldly methods in our work, sinful deception, corrupt business practices, these don't know God's blessing. You might get contracts, you might make a lot of money, but you'll not be satisfied. God thwarts the craving of the wicked. So the real thing that you're wanting at the end of the day from all this work is not just provision, but satisfaction, significance. You want to be able to have that sigh and say, that was fulfilling. To accomplish this, to have achieved this, to have gained this, to have done this, this was satisfying. And God thwarts that when we don't work God's way. Again, it's a whole lot of Proverbs throughout this section are going to reinforce this principle. Here's a smattering. Proverbs 16:3. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs 16:3, right? Commit your work to the Lord. We don't just work in this mechanical way that, this always produces the result. No, God brings stability and success to work that is yielded to Him. Commit your work to the Lord. Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, and He adds no sorrow with it. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and He adds no sorrow with it. When God blesses, when God rewards, it's not accompanied by sorrow, by regret, by anything bad. When we work according to the world's ways and ethics, there is some kind of reward, there is some kind of gain, but it always comes with sorrow, with regret, with dissatisfaction, with guilt, with shame, with destruction of some form. But when God blesses our work, which is done in God's way, there's no sorrow with it. Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Ethical work, excellent work, done God's way, even the world will recognize it. Even the world sees the value of this kind of work and their need of it. So we can't just work mechanically. The problems and the difficulties of finding and accomplishing work are meant to drive us to God, to get help from Him. Our work is to be done with God, alongside God, in a way that pleases God and in dependence on God, knowing that for this work to be productive, for this work to be fruitful and effective, requires God's blessing, God's hand in it all. Our work engages us in dependent effort. As we work, we are to seek God's help and know that God is working alongside us to bless our work, to make it fruitful. Work is a blessing to others. Work must be done ethically. God blesses and rewards our work. Fourthly, verse 4, work requires diligence and planning. Work requires diligence and planning. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So God has ordained the means by which work produces fruit, blessing, provision, and that means is diligence. Diligence makes rich. The contrast there is a slack hand, which causes poverty. So any strategy or scheme which tries to shortcut diligent, sustained effort is not God's way. It's working against the means by which God blesses work, the means that God has ordained to bless work. Get-rich schemes, making money while you sleep, cheating on your studying and getting the degree anyway, but now you haven't worked for it, you haven't studied for it, you haven't really earned it. That doesn't gain anything in the long run. You're robbing yourself of the reward, of the real satisfaction of having grappled and done this hard work and come out the other side victorious, successful, learned. Planning, thought, effort, these are required in order to make work fruitful. The hand of the diligent makes rich. And again, a whole lot of Proverbs in this section are going to show us this from many different ways, many different ways of saying the same thing. Proverbs 13:4. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. right? So the desire without effort is futile, but diligence satisfies. So the sluggard craves and craves, but he does nothing about it. And he's never satisfied. But the diligent, they work at it, they apply themselves, they plan, they make effort, and they're satisfied because of that. Richly supplied. Proverbs 13:11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Ethical work involves patience, fairness, no shortcuts to getting rich in God's scheme. Proverbs 21:5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who's hasty comes only to poverty. The plans of the diligent, and it's contrasted to the hasty, those who want this to be quickly solved. They want an easy way out. They want a shortcut. And how do I learn this in a minute? How do I get rich in a year? Thoughtful, steady work yields wealth. Rash shortcuts lead to loss. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who's hasty comes only to poverty. These things can guard and protect you. When somebody, makes me some sort of offer that, that you're going to gain all of this, or you're going to benefit in all these ways, whether that be physical wealth or even fitness. You're going to run the comrades by training on this program for 3 weeks. Yes. The Proverbs tell me I can just throw that thing out. I don't even have to waste the next 3 minutes hearing what the program is. Because there is no way to do that in God's world and how God's made his world to work. So work is not a terrible thing to be avoided. It's a wonderful thing to be embraced. The difficulty of work, the obstacles of work, we should embrace them. We should diligently apply ourselves to them and work at them, you see. That's what God has made work to be. That's what makes the reward of work so satisfying. A problem solved, an obstacle overcome, a battle fought and won. This is what makes work satisfying, and there's no easy way to get that satisfaction other than to persevere in this diligent, sustained planning and effort which we called work. If work were easy, we'd be robbed of any sense of accomplishment. Right? When you apply yourself diligently to learn to play the violin over a decade, hours and hours and hours of practice, and then you can bless someone with a beautiful song to the glory of Christ, you've accomplished something to the glory of Christ. And there's no shortcuts to that. The satisfaction of all this effort now bearing fruit in blessing others and enabling them to worship, that is our work, and that gives us meaning and significance to the glory of God. Proverbs 18:9. Whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. Whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. Undisciplined effort, slacking off, it's not neutral, it's destructive. We're not doing anyone a favor, we're not doing ourselves a favor by slacking off at work when the boss isn't there, by trying to find the easiest job with the least effort and trouble. Our country is suffering because our people haven't embraced God's wisdom on work. Our people want maximum wage for minimum effort. They don't actually want to be productive, they just want to get money for doing nothing. What a blessing it is to a family and a church and a country when people are willing and able to work. And they find joy in that. Firstly, work requires self-discipline. Work requires self-discipline. Verse 5, it says, he who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. So this has obviously got an agricultural background. It's farming here. There's a time to plant. There's a time to reap. There's precious little you can do to change that. And the point is, when it comes time to reap, to gather, if you're wise, you will gather. And if you're a fool, you'll keep procrastinating and delaying and thinking, tomorrow, tomorrow. And by the time you actually decide to get it, it's no longer time to reap. It's past that time, and you don't get the harvest that you're wanting. The sun here is sleeping when it's time to be reaping. You might wake up a week later and really want to work hard and be energetic and be keen, but the time has passed. And so you see the element of self-discipline. God has ordained times and seasons, and we need to embrace those for work. When God says now is the time to do this, we need to have the self-discipline to apply ourselves to that, knowing that He's sovereign in all these things. That's part of the blessing of work, by the way. It teaches us to say no to our feelings, no to our flesh. Work strengthens us against the fight against sin. Because every time we say no to this lazy flesh that we have, no, I must do this, we're strengthening our resolve. We're acting against our baser nature. And it's strengthening us to say no to sin and to other desires of the flesh. If you live according to how you feel, you will live as a fool. Work means we can't engage in activity when we feel like it. We need to engage in what God has ordained when He's ordained it. To apply ourselves, even though I might not feel like it, might be the last thing I feel like doing. Again, a whole host of Proverbs are going to underscore this principle. Proverbs 12:11. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. So there's productive work we can be busy with, and that will bring plenty and abundance and provision. But there's a whole lot of things we can be busy with that are worthless. I can think of a few. Like watching YouTube shorts. You're not going to earn a living doing that. You're not going to earn a degree doing that. You're going to get a job doing that, unless you're one of those very few social media giants whose people watch their YouTube channels. But on the whole, there's pursuits that we can engage in. It's busyness, it's activity, but it's not productive, it's not fruitful, it's worthless, and it doesn't gain anything for us, for others. Proverbs 14:23, in all toil there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Talking about work is not work. We can have all the plans we want in the world. We can have drawn up all the business plans and schedules and study schedules, but until we get to actually doing them, the discipline of implementing them, we haven't done anything. Proverbs 24, the sluggard does not plow in the autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing. Same idea, right? Later on, he's wanting the benefit, but he wasn't doing the work when it was required. The sluggard doesn't plow in the autumn when he should be. And he will seek at harvest and have nothing when he realizes, now I want the benefit, but it's too late. Proverbs 22:13, the sluggard says, there's a lion outside, I shall be killed in the streets. Procrastination, making excuses. The sluggard has always got a reason why it's not the right time to work, it's dangerous to work. I'm too sick, I'm too tired, I'm not old enough, I'm too old. There's a million excuses the sluggard has. There's a lion outside. This might have been a good reason in certain contexts, right? But in South Africa today, no. Procrastinating, making excuses why you can't work is not going to be getting anything good done. That's half the problem with our entertainment-driven culture. Our whole culture is pushing us towards entertainment 7 days a week, which means we do what we feel like doing, we do what's enjoyable to do, we do what is not productive and fruitful. And we fill our lives so much with all this entertainment, it makes it very hard for us to be productive and to push through and be disciplined and diligent in all the ways that work actually requires. That's the real danger. Be careful of that, of what you're feeding yourself with, because it makes it so much harder to work. We all know when we've taken a vacation, right? That first day back at work, wow, it is hard. After I've taken a week off, I don't want to ever work again in my life. Imagine I do that regularly. I'll never be able to pull myself out of bed. God has ordained work, not entertainment, for 6 days of the week. And work in the long run makes our life a blessing to others. It makes us purposeful and meaningful. So just 2 comments here before I close. Not all work is employment. Don't confuse those two. Not all work is employment, not all employment. Those aren't the same thing. A housewife or a homemaker might not earn a salary. She might not be formally employed, but she does a lot of work. And a lot of her work adds a lot of value to many people's lives, though she may not receive a salary for that. A student or a scholar, they're not maybe getting paid. They might have a bursary or a scholarship, but often they're not getting paid to work, but their work is to study. And their studying is about preparing themselves in order to be able to work later on. So that's a student's job, is working. And if they're not willing to work hard at their studying, then they should go and do some other work. Studying is never meant to be an occupation in and of itself. Those who have employment, therefore, cannot make all their work about employment. You can't say, well, I worked hard at my job where I was employed, and that's it. Every other waking hour of my life, I'm not going to do any work. No, work is much more comprehensive than that. You can't come home from your employment and now do nothing. There's work to be done at home too. Other kinds of work. There's work to be done in the family, in the marriage, on the house, at the church. And so we need to embrace that there's more work going on in what God has ordained than merely employment. And then stop rewarding laziness. Again, I have to put my finger on some cultural issues, because that's what MacArthur can't do that I can do, is address South African cultural issues, right? So in some of our cultures and schemes, we rightfully are engaged in helping family members who are unemployed, who are struggling for various reasons. And it's right that we support our families in those ways, but we need to be careful that we're not supporting laziness. Our responsibility is to help people work. And those who are not willing to work, those who are not heading towards work, we shouldn't be helping them stay in that state. We should rather try and offer the kind of help that would move people towards work. Maybe they don't have employment, but they can still do productive work. And if they're not doing anything, if they're not working productively, then we shouldn't be supporting them. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, even when I was with you, we would give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. So, finally, work for Jesus. Ultimately, we've got to take this and say, you know what? All our work is for Jesus. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord. He's the one we're ultimately working for, and that's why everything we're doing should be done with the Lord and for the Lord. This is a massive area of biblical wisdom, and our cultures, they don't have it. So you and I really need to take these principles that relate to work in God's Word. We need to embrace them. We need to take them into our heart. We need to reprogram ourselves so we don't treat our work and approach our work like the world around us. We must be Christians, working for Jesus Christ, which means working in a totally different way than the world around us. Work is a blessing to others, not just for myself. Work must be done ethically. God rewards and blesses our work. We're doing it with Him and for Him. Work requires diligence and planning. Work requires self-discipline. I'll close with one illustration. Post-Second World War, Germany and Japan, they were completely devastated by the war, right? Their houses, their infrastructure was totally blown up. The economy was in tatters. Between 1950 and 1960, unemployment in Germany went from 10% to 1%. Industrial production increased by 25%. In under 50 years, these two countries rebuilt their infrastructure and their economies to becoming some of the leading industrial nations in the world. From the ashes of the war, the nation was rebuilt in 50 years because they were diligent and they worked together. They didn't even work for the Lord. What can we not do working for the Lord? Let's pray.